Welcome, everyone, to the new Volunteer Disaster Cycle Services Orientation. We're so glad that you're with us. I'm here with Ken Robinson, our Regional Disaster Officer for the Central and Southern Ohio region. And together, we'll be hosting our orientation session for today. You'll get to know both of us a little bit better a bit later in our program. What we hope you take away from this program, though, is that you have some practical tools to help you as you journey with us in helping our clients who need us the most. So let's take a look at what we'll be covering during this time together. We have a lot of ground to cover, but the best part is that we get to share the Red Cross story and what you need to know as a volunteer leader as you volunteer with us. Ken, the story of the Red Cross and those who have helped shape our organization has always been so impressive to me. Can you share a bit about how that came to be and who are some of those thought leaders that spoke into this organization?
Absolutely. So let me introduce you to a couple of the leaders that had a passion to serve others. These leaders led the way out to what we know as the American Red Cross today. We're a community of people directed by a common unity called for in our fundamental principles. On the slide, you're going to see a little bit about Henri Dunant, who founded the International Red Cross movement. And below that, you'll see about Clara Barton, who founded the American Red Cross in a little old chapter in Danville, New York in 1881. Every organization has a set of principles that guide the work that we do. The Red Cross serves all over the world and are bound by these 7 fundamental principles: humanity, partiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, unity, and universality. Our primary purpose is to provide humanitarian assistance regardless of religion, race, nationality, status, identity, or political opinions. We do that by partnering with local communities and knowing our neighbors so we can provide more services to those in need using our diverse workforce. No matter where we serve, locally, nationally, or internationally, these principles are in place for every response. Now that we know what our fundamental principles are, let's take a look at the Red Cross mission.
I remember when I joined the Red Cross as a volunteer, I was drawn to helping people in crisis. How does the Red Cross do that, you might ask? Well, we do that by living the mission, which has 3 key parts. Our mission, as you can see on the slide, says the American Red Cross prevents and alleviates human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of our donors. Well, really, this has 3 parts. The first is, what is it that the Red Cross does? And that is, we prevent and alleviate human suffering. Second, where do we do that? We do it in the face of emergencies, local, regional, national, international. But the other piece is, how do we do that? And we do this by being able to have the generosity of our donors and the power that comes with people who are invested in our mission. So in short, we help others when people share their time, their talents, and treasures with others. But you know what? We can't do this work alone. We need you, our volunteers, and our donors to work with us to alleviate the human suffering that we see at any level of a disaster, small or large scale. And we've talked about our history and our fundamental principles and our mission. Those are all central components of what the Red Cross embodies. And when you look at the Red Cross as an organization, you can see that carried out every day. But now we'd like to share a little bit about our region and our team, those leaders who stand with us as volunteers and staff, making this mission happen. And so, Ken, I wonder, what does our region look like?
Well, the Central and Southern Ohio region, or your first acronym of the day, CSOR, is comprised of 47 counties throughout Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. These are divided into 5 chapters, and you'll see those in the map on this slide. Greater Cincinnati Tri-State chapter holds our regional headquarters. It's based in the Cincinnati office, and you'll see that in blue. The Miami Valley chapter is made up of red, and that chapter headquarters is based in Dayton. The East Central chapter is made up of pink, and that surrounds Greater Columbus, which is made up of green. And our final chapter is South Central Ohio, and you'll see that in the southern part of the state, and that one is shown in yellow. So I'll give you a second just to pick out on the map where your county might be.
Well, I know I'm a green. And so as I look at this map, I'm wondering, you've got quite a tenure here with the Red Cross, and what drives you to serve the mission for Red Cross, Ken?
So I guess I'd say this, we get to be the best part of someone's worst day ever. And for me, my joy is in empowering volunteers and empowering my employees on staff to be able to remove obstacles so that folks can live the mission and serve clients and meet the needs of partners.
And for those of us on this Teams meeting today, I'd like to brag a little bit about our regional disaster officer. Ken Robinson joined the Red Cross as a volunteer in 1989, and he has been on staff as an RDO since 1995. He's a certified disaster manager and is one of the longest serving disaster leaders in the nation. His goal is to maintain the CSOR region as a people-first organization, providing superior volunteer experiences in an environment of support and collaboration. Honestly, every time I'm working with him, he is focused on making sure that staff and volunteers are happy, satisfied, and enthusiastic to do the job that they've been called to do. And the best part about this for Ken and for me as his volunteer partner, he does this naturally with a natural gift of leadership and of enthusiasm to guide a team. So Ken, as you look at the people on your team, who are some of those leaders that our volunteers might interact with?
So we've got a big set of folks for everyone to work with. In addition to Pat and me, we have Emily Aloto, who's our Senior Disaster Program Manager. She supervises the teams in each of our 5 chapters. Chad Whitaker is our Readiness and Response Manager. Andy Poppy is our Planning and Situational Awareness Manager. Emily Hesselbein focuses on preparedness and partnerships. Shannon O'Neill works with all of our recovery and individual disaster care team members. Read that as caseworkers, health services workers, spiritual care workers, and mental health workers. And then Elisa Nordmeyer keeps us all glued together. She's our disaster workforce engagement manager. So while I've got overall responsibility for the programs, I share that work with Pat, and I share that work with this entire team of folks who manage functional groups within the region. And there's more to come on that.
So if a volunteer wanted to know who in their own chapter might be a point of contact, can you help us get to know who those folks are and who those leaders, how those leaders can be located?
So in each chapter, we have a disaster program manager and a disaster program specialist. And they manage the program in their assigned counties. And their job, first and foremost, is to empower volunteers to be ready to serve, to help a client and help a partner when that's needed. So you can always reach out to your disaster program manager or specialist, and you can also always reach out to your supervisor. So this shows you a little bit about how we divide our services up. Biomedical services refers to our blood services program. And in most of the central and southern Ohio region, we actively collect blood to meet the needs of patients in hospitals. You'll see a block here that says preparedness, health and safety services, or more recently called training services. And that offers classes in CPR, first aid, and aquatics. Our Services to the Armed Forces program supports those currently serving in the military, their families and veterans. And that's our oldest line of service in the American Red Cross. Our International Services Departments works with other Red Cross and Red Crescent societies around the world. In Israel, their national society is called the Magen David Adom. They provide support in times of disaster abroad. They support capacity building between Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, and they promote in every country international humanitarian law. And then finally, disaster cycle services.
Ken, when I first came into Red Cross, I thought, like probably many others do, that Red Cross just does blood services. But the picture you just shared about the Red Cross really shows a whole continuum of care, both nationally and internationally. That's really exciting. And when can those listening come to find some information, not only about these services, but about the Red Cross and their role as a volunteer?
Several great ways to do that. Let's talk about one of those now. That's our volunteer handbook. I think that's one document you'll find most helpful as you begin your journey in the American Red Cross. If you want to take time to review the volunteer handbook, you can find it in your Volunteer Connection account under the My NHQ tab. And we'll learn in a little bit how to navigate to Volunteer Connection so that you can do that. You can also on that same site, look at opportunities and find out other ways that you can get involved in the local chapter. If you've got questions about what you've read in the volunteer handbook after reading through it, please contact your supervisor or your chapter's disaster program manager.
Ken, on this slide, I see that the code of conduct is underlined with the words very important. Why is that?
The code of conduct is important. Just like in many industries, you've got those types of standards. The code of conduct makes sure that we're honoring confidences, that we're protecting the information of our clients, and really sort of lays the foundation for how we're all going to engage each other individually and engage with partners and engage with clients.
Every industry that I have ever been in has its own set of acronyms. I don't know about you or where the viewers tonight or today are coming from, but I came out of healthcare and we constantly were using acronyms to communicate to teams what was needing to happen with the patient or what kind of diagnosis that person had. One thing I've come to learn in Red Cross, don't assume that you know what these acronyms stand for. Just a funny story. I'll never forget reading in the hospital a chart of a patient prior to going to see them. And the doctor had written right next to the patient's name what I thought to be a word that I wouldn't even utter. He wrote SOB. And I thought, oh my gosh, why would he be so harsh? Why would he call the patient SOB? I had no idea that it meant shortness of breath. You are going to find acronyms that you think you know. Maybe those acronyms were even some acronyms that were used in your own company or another company that you had been with. Here's what I want to help you with. Know that the acronyms and the knowledge of what those words mean in their abbreviated form will come to you. You will keep hearing them over and over again. But I'm wondering, what are some of the most frequent acronyms that we hear around disaster cycle services? Ken, when I look on this screen, what are some that you want to point out to our folks tonight?
SV for supervisor. That's the most important person on your Red Cross journey who isn't a client. So knowing who your supervisor is incredibly important. And then everyone's going to find on that list parts of the mission that they're going to engage, whether it's responding to home fires as part of the disaster action team, whether it's mass care with our feeding, sheltering activities, logistics, which gets stuff to people to help people. You'll see all of these and a little bit more description of them here in a bit.
In that description, one of the things that I have always found valuable for any organization is to be able to cast a vision about where it is the organization is going. So Now that we've talked a little bit about disaster cycle services, some of its structure and some of the foundational wording that you may hear, let's talk a little bit about what our 5-year plan is as it comes from our vice presidents, Jennifer Pippa and Brad Kaiserman. Ken, can you share more about that?
Absolutely. So you'll hear folks talk about a phrase in this operation that talks about acute to chronic, where we used to think things were special and rare. Now things have moved to chronic. Let me give you a couple of numbers. In the 1980s, we responded to three $3 billion disasters in the United States on average. In the 2000s, that moved to $6.7 billion disasters in the United States. And now that's north of 20. So the frequency and the intensities of disasters is increasing exponentially. From where I started in 1995 to where we are now, it is unrecognizable. And we don't think that that trend is going to change. So to account for some of that, our leaders, Brad and Pippa, put together a picture of what we're striving to do over the next 5 years. When you're really, really busy, it's easy to focus on a transaction or a task. And we want to make sure that we're moving from transactional to being transformational in our services and in how we engage communities. Presence is a mission and presence is a promise. We have to have more services to those with the greatest need for as long as they need, directly and through partnerships, because no agency can do this work alone. We have to improve our access to services and resources for all. We have to focus on people, not on processes. We need to respond to the needs that are voiced by our clients and not assumed by organizations or by individuals not from that community. It's important that we become the most trusted disaster relief provider in the United States. And to do that, we need to listen and we need to engage. And after we reflect on that, we need to take action. Part of that is focusing on community indicators such as health and hunger and housing and those needs in communities and how that impacts resilience and recovery after an event. We know that people with degraded health outcomes, people that are food insecure, and people that struggle to have access to safe and affordable housing will be much more impacted after a disaster of any size, be that a home fire or a tornado. We also had to reinforce our focus on equality and equity, and those are different. Equality is everybody gets the same thing, and equity is everybody gets what they need to have to get to the same outcome. That means we have to pay attention to readiness and capacity building. We have to have an empowered and diverse workforce that mirrors and better understands our communities. We want to get out of our own way, as I like to say, which means we need to simplify our training. It needs to be standard, it's relevant. We do it on the job as often as we can, but also we have to commit to doing that. And that training is an ongoing part of the work that we do so that we're always staying prepared and able to onboard the next new crop of volunteers and know where they've come from and know what they've learned. So as we're helping to mentor and partner with them in their own growth as they deliver services, we can stay connected. So this is the big picture of what our goals are in the next 5 years. Pat, why don't you break this down into the 3 phases of disaster cycle services that we'll refer to?
In every disaster, there are phases within that mission of service. And the Red Cross delivers disaster cycle services to clients throughout 3 major processes or phases. The first is preparedness. The second is emergency response. And the third is recovery. So let's talk about these in a bit more detail. When we look at preparedness, preparedness occurs during what we call steady state or non-emergency times. We use this period to educate the public on how to prepare for disasters. And we're also teaching families how to prevent things like home fires or teaching children how to escape from a home or have an escape plan from a potential fire and installing free smoke alarms. That, in collaboration many times with our firefighter partners, is something that saves lives. And it is actually something that we measure and we are quite proud of. But we as volunteers prepare ourselves by learning our responsibilities for an actual event through training. And the best thing about the training at Red Cross, it's free. Red Cross disaster training is not only comprehensive to teach you what you need to know, whether you deploy as someone who wants to be in a shelter with helping those clients, or someone who wants to help feed the clients, someone who may have a professional skill like mental health or health services or spiritual care. All of these types of courses, as well as many others, are offered online or in person in classroom settings. And they're required for baseline achievement of knowledge to do certain roles within the Red Cross as a volunteer. Your background, your gifts, and your talents, all that comes into play. But we also want to make sure that you could use those gifts, talents, and knowledge that you have in the face of a disaster operation and train you up so that you are prepared for that event. And preparedness training starts really early, like with our youth in youth preparedness programs. You might see yourself helping kindergartners to second graders take a journey through a story with Pedro the Penguin. This fun and engaging 30 to 45-minute presentation helps kids to know what they need to do if they are ever confronted with a home fire. And every chapter within the Red Cross in this region has a volunteer that works in preparedness, and they can help provide you additional details of how you might want to volunteer for that program. So Ken, we've talked about preparing the kids, but what about preparing adults?
There's several ways that we can prepare adults. One of them is called Be Red Cross Ready. Sounds silly, but it works. And that's a set of programs focused on adult preparedness. And we can also tailor that both to a hazard like tornadoes or winter storms or floods, or it could be general preparedness, or we can focus on the audience, or perhaps we focus on older adults. Perhaps we focus on college students that are away from home for the first time and don't quite understand what the tornado sirens are, because where they're from, that's not a thing. So Be Red Cross Ready is one of our signature programs. Hands-only CPR helps people learn how to check for consciousness, to call 911, and to give continuous chest compressions so that between the time a call for help is made after the emergency's been detected, that person's getting baseline care until EMS arrives. And then for larger organizations or schools, we can have a program called Ready Rating that allows a business or organization to evaluate itself on its level of preparedness, and that will result in a checklist of things that they can do to make their business or organization stronger and more resilient in the face of an emergency. So at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about how we can't do this work alone. In the preparedness phase, we're working with a network of partners like schools or local fire departments to install smoke detectors and provide information about creating exit plans in the case of fire to reduce injury or save lives. That's an example of upstream thinking. How do we make people more prepared and more safe so that we have to respond less often to an actual home fire? And then we transition from local levels of responses to another disaster. Response occurs during what you might hear called an operational state, or when a significant event has occurred. Those could be man-made, such as a home fire, a power outage, natural disaster, such as a hurricane or an earthquake or a tornado. And then there are also mass casualty situations that might be shootings or a transportation incident or a chemical release. Whatever the event, your group might be called in to help people with their immediate needs for shelter, for food, for replacing medical devices such as glasses or medicines or durable medical equipment, to support the volunteers providing services directly to clients, and to support the clients themselves with our mental health and spiritual care workers. And once we've met those clients' need through the response phase, it naturally transitions to our final phase, which is recovery. Pat, what does that look like?
Well, recovery is the final part of a disaster cycle, and recovery helps people rebuild their lives in accessing their resources, working with those government agencies or community organizations, or even health services. And recovery begins, as Ken said, after a significant event has occurred. Often, casework and recovery volunteers work diligently to help the client rebuild their lives and access all of those resources within their community that are available to them. So, in short, this phase focuses on building resilience in the lives of those who've been impacted by the disaster and allowing them to recognize their strengths, embrace a new hope for their future, and access available resources that can be found in their local community. So now that you have a little bit more of an understanding of the three phases of the disaster cycle services, let's take a look at some of the specific areas that service and how we serve in local and regional and national operations take place. Locally, our disaster action teams provide 24-hour immediate emergency response to local disasters. Disaster action teams, if you're looking for that acronym, we call them DAT teams. And they are particularly called to house fires, but not only house fires. These members ensure that those affected have immediate access to basic needs like shelter, food, clothing, blankets. I started out being a DAT member, and I can recall the numerous times meeting people at all hours of the evening and early morning. And I met them with a warm hug, a blanket, a bit of hope, just to help them continue past their current reality. And you know what? There is nothing better than helping someone who has lost their home, lost their loved one, lost their pet in some kind of a fire. Being with them in that time when they need you the most really speaks to my heart.
Every day we see newscasts about disasters across the country. Floods and tornadoes and atmospheric rivers, which we never used to have, and fires and hurricanes, and a lot more things. If the disaster is in your neck of the woods, what do you need to help with first? This is where our mass care team stands ready to respond to that need. Mass care takes care of people, whether that's the public impacted by the disaster or the first responders performing their jobs at a disaster incident. Our services in that area include feeding, sheltering, distributing emergency supplies after the emergency has passed, and also reunification, helping to reconnect loved ones who've lost touch because of the impacted infrastructure that a disaster can cause. Mass care and other services cannot be successful without a strong team of logistics folks who help to position just what is needed when it's needed. No disaster relief operation can be delivered without logistics. It just isn't possible. This group arranges and executes the delivery of equipment and supplies needed directly by our clients or to set up a job headquarters, to set up a shelter or a communication center, and anything else required at a disaster service delivery site. That includes acquiring materials and facilities, warehouse space, tracking vehicles that we're using. It's an incredibly important job, and there's a lot of opportunity to help in that area. So we've talked so far about two key programs that meet the physical needs of the clients we serve. Now let's discuss the ways that the Red Cross meets the needs for clients' emotional, medical, and spiritual care support.
People suffer trauma often after an event, and individual disaster care takes care of the emotional and the physical needs of people affected by disaster, as well as the Red Cross members who are serving. This includes assistance with mental health or being able to develop some coping strategies and resilient strategies to keep moving one more step forward. Healthcare needs. Maybe they need some medication or some durable medical equipment. They've lost their wheelchair. They don't have their dentures. All of those are very important to the client. And spiritual care needs. Often in a disaster, it's very hard to find the hope that you are connected to, that hope that comes from your church, the hope that comes from whatever you find to be most spiritual in your life. And looking at those elements are critical for us to understand how best to help that client. But you also know that we have clients who may present with some disabilities, some areas where they have functional or access needs, and they're in need of interpreters or TTY devices, or they have service animals. All of that comes under the category of making sure that we are working with response services and helping them recover well. So we live, if I had to paint a picture for us, we live in a melting pot of cultures and tradition. And in line with our fundamental principles that we talked about earlier, individual disaster care seeks to honor the culture, the religion, the traditions of every single person that we meet. And recovery is an ongoing process. It's not just we meet a need today and boom, we're gone. It is a ongoing process that affects all of us in disaster. We spoke earlier about how the recovery team members help people rebuild their lives on a local level with the home fires. But this role also expands to any national disaster. They conduct client interviews, provide clients with information about referrals in the community and partners. They assess their qualification for additional assistance. And all of that assistance is documented on a central computer system to increase our efficiency and effectiveness in the information sharing that we need to provide to other activities to help them as well. It is a comprehensive support, but the focus is always on people first, and the task is second. And this relates back to our priority. We want to be transformational, not transactional. We want to make sure what we're doing impacts that client where that client needs. So, Ken, operationally, one area or gap, as we call it in the Red Cross, that serves all of our teams and really helps us transform our processes is through technology. Can you share with us about what disaster service technology does?
Disaster service technology folks are unsung heroes. They have to have the ability to communicate, receive, and deliver information. We need that to be safe. We need that to understand where we are in an operation. Those volunteers inventory, install, support computers, support the phones and tablets and laptops that we need to deliver services, make sure that we have printers and other IT equipment. And they install communications equipment such as radios and antennas, gets us access to boosters when we're in an area where the cell signal is diminished. All of that is incredibly important because without that, we're disconnected. We can't be hearing what our clients are asking of us. We can't hear what our partners are asking for us. So having that infrastructure in place and being able to recreate it in a spot that didn't have it before, some large abandoned box store, let's say, and turn it into a functional service delivery site so that we can meet human need is incredibly important.
You know, I can remember I recently deployed to Hurricane Ian, and I don't know what I'd do without the DST people. And I recognized right in that moment that we all have gifts and talents that we bring to bear to serve for the greater good. This area, as with so many areas, are filled with people who have a willing heart and want to provide a hand up to others through technology. And it takes so many people to make a response successful. So let's now talk about a team that staffs each one of these operations.
So to mobilize the power of volunteers, you need to have a group of volunteers to do that. So we require our volunteers to make themselves available. Might be all the time at home, might be certain parts of the year. And the activity that coordinates volunteer deployments on site, onboards them, helps them with training, fulfill staffing requests from other activities when we are initiating and sustaining a response. Those are called staff services workers. Outside of an active response, we'll call those workforce engagement team members. Same people, just depends on the activity that they're doing. It has the same priority that our staff services folks do to ensure a good hello and works to provide the highest quality volunteer experience possible. Doesn't matter whether you're in an operational state on an active disaster response or if it's any other Tuesday at your home chapter. Those folks have the same priority to make sure that we continue to strive to be the agency of choice for people wishing to serve communities after an emergency. So much of what you see in the media, whether that's the newspapers, television, or radio, messaging to our partners, government, or emergency management, is influenced and guided by a group of volunteers that come from an activity called external relations. Pat, would you help us understand what that group does?
Oh, I'd love to. I don't know about you, but every time something happens in my community, or if you see something televised and it's a large disaster, the public wants to know about it. I want to know about it. I am sure I'm not alone. And the public has a right to know what is happening because they also have a intrinsic need to say, gosh, is there any way that I can help? Well, external relations provides the voice of the Red Cross and communicates with the media during this event. We make sure the message that is being sent to our people either over the airwaves or in the newspaper or on social media is consistent, it's clear, and it provides the person who has experienced this kind of disaster a path to the resources they need and the help that they need. External relations develops and maintains working relationships with a lot of different partners, our government partners, our nonprofit organizations, community groups, our faith-based organizations. All of that is being managed under the umbrella of external relations. And no one organization can meet all the needs of a disaster cycle. So our partnerships and our partnership volunteers serve to facilitate these leadership discussions and support the whole community approach to preparedness, response, and recovery. Remember those three phases? And so, Ken, our response to disaster, it just doesn't happen. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of information to ensure that we have the best available information to make both strategic and tactical decisions. So what role would be responsible for this type of service?
That is our information and planning crowd. Those folks understand that situations are ever changing and evolving during a disaster event. Information and planning monitors the extent of the damage, number of people impacted, and the amount of resources that we might need to assist potential clients and communities. Information and planning is responsible for gathering and communicating that data to ensure effective management of a response. And it also plays an incredibly important role in monitoring conditions during an emerging event, such as a weather emergency or potential civil disturbances, and it helps us keep the workforce safe. So even when we're responding, we're still watching, where are the storms? Where are the floodwaters coming? What potential hazards do we face as we're operating in a certain environment on a certain day? So that has got incredibly important activities to initiate, both in steady state times when we're not all completely focused on a single event. But once boom happens, on the right side of boom, as we call it, then they need to help us know what we're looking at, track what we've done, and plan for future activity.
As we look at the information that we shared just so far, you might be wondering, how do people serve in the Red Cross? Does everybody show up in person? Is everybody in a shelter? How does that work? Well, I can tell you, since COVID occurred, organizations everywhere had to adjust and adapt to a new way of serving their clients. And for many years, especially the last 20 years, I would say remote working wasn't as fully embraced. But during COVID, the working landscape changed. And so we talked about the many opportunities to service in our mission with your physical presence, when you're physically present in a shelter, when you're physically present at a home fire, when you're physically present on a disaster relief operation. But you know what? There is an equal amount of opportunity to serve in person or even virtually, right from your very home. That has expanded the opportunities for our Red Cross volunteers, and we're really excited about that.
The Red Cross has so many opportunities, as you'll see in this colorful eye chart on the screen now. And each of the activities below requires different training to prepare for entry level, supervisor, or manager level assignments. The top line items that you see are called groups. Groups represent a large topical area of similar activities. The boxes below that are specific activities that may be client facing, meaning people work directly with disaster affected clients on an operation. Activities in the outline boxes are not client facing, meaning people working behind the scenes to support a disaster relief operation. Think of those logistics folks I just talked about, or the disaster services technology volunteers, behind the scenes, but incredibly important. So you might be wondering, what if I want to deploy? What is it I need to do for that? We have answers for that. If you're interested in deploying, there's some important items to know, as well as some eligibility requirements. You should have a Red Cross ID, and you're in Volunteer Connection by now. You can download the Volunteer Connection app and your ID is right there. In most circumstances, you should have a valid driver's license. If you don't, because you're unable to have a driver's license, we can have a conversation about an accommodation for that. Once you're trained in a volunteer role and you have what we call a GAP, a group activity position assignment, you want to be sure your available dates are posted in Volunteer Connection. And you do that under a section called Disaster Responder Availability. And you get to determine how far away you want to go from home. Do you want to go just in the state of Ohio? Do you want to go in our division, which is Ohio, Kentucky, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia? Do you want to go anywhere? And you mark that down there, and then we know for what types of things we should call you. You also need to be able to consider your physical and mental health before each deployment, as the environment is often stressful. And you want to make sure that you're yourself in a good place physically and emotionally before you say yes to a disaster assignment. It's also important to keep your emergency contacts up to date as well. Each GAP has associated training that equips the volunteer to provide them with the services and the knowledge and the information needed to be successful in that area. And we've got all kinds of ways to obtain that training. Might be in person, might be virtual training that's hybrid, and it might be strictly web-based. So let's take a look at how we access some of these online tools we've talked about.
When we look at the slide on the screen right now, it says at the Red Cross, you will primarily be using these three websites. One is called Volunteer Connection. It's kind of our central hub. The second is Edge, and that's an educational website. And I'll go through those in a little bit more detail. And the final one is called the Exchange. That's kind of our Google for Red Cross. So let's take a little bit of a walk through each one of these. So you will find it pretty easy to access Volunteer Connection. You simply log on to volunteerconnection.redcross.org and you open up your homepage. You will want to spend some time, as I did, just kind of browsing through the website because there's a lot on it, just to become familiar with all of the things that it offers. There's a tab that runs across the top that I found especially useful, and it's called My Shifts. And that contains calendars of engagement opportunities, such as volunteer virtual meetings and in-person meetings, or volunteer events or volunteer appreciation events. All those are really awesome things to attend and to get to know some other Red Cross volunteers who believe and feel the same way you do. They want to help people. So Ken, what should the volunteer do once they're in Volunteer Connection?
So if you're going to build a to-do list for your volunteer connection, first thing's going to be keeping your profile up to date. You change your email address, we don't know about it. We lose track of you. We don't want to do that. Make sure the phone number is current. It's also important that we ask everybody to track how much time you volunteer. That matters for a whole lot of reasons. But the biggest one is tracking your engagement. We want to know what your experience is like, and we want you to be able to put in the time that you provide to us. And we will use that in other ways too. For example, we might have a grant application, but we'll want to say that we had X number of hours of our volunteers that were focused on preparedness activities. So while they're important reasons externally, the biggest one is that we want to honor your time, and we want to make sure that we understand what your engagement is, because the data in there helps us understand your story. It's also where you get to register for events, for different meetings and classes through the My Shifts tab that Pat mentioned. To receive up-to-date information about meetings and events, you always want to register for your shifts ahead of time if you can. And if this is something that your group requires, it's important that you know how to do this. If you're interested in deploying, you always want to make sure to keep your responder availability dates current. If deploying is really your desired volunteer experience, the best way to have that happen is for you to have that range of availability in there, because those are the folks that are going to get reached out to first to see if you can go from where you are to where the need is. So once you earn your first gap or volunteer role, that's something to really pay a lot of attention to. And if you ever have questions about this, you can ask your supervisor, your disaster program manager or specialist, or your chapter's workforce engagement team. And they will be very happy to help you understand, walk you through what you need to do to get that to happen.
So we spoke about training a while ago, and we talked about achieving a gap, that global, um, say that again for me,
Group, activity, and position.
group activity and position,
Always learning.
always learning. EDGE is a system that will also help us achieve our goals. So Ken, talk to us a little bit about EDGE.
EDGE is our learning management system. It's another important website for you. It stands for Engagement, Development, Growth, and Education. I don't make the names up. I'm just reporting to you what they are. And this is where you register and take your online courses. You can sign up for in-person courses there as well. And you can find out what the classes are at different chapter locations. You can find out where a particular course might be offered, and it may be anywhere in the country. Then you hop on to a virtually instructor-led class, and you might be taking a class with folks from California and New Mexico and Guam. You never know who's going to be in one of those classes. So that's an important place to sort of initiate and track your learning journey. And you can also search for different classes there too. So if you're just interested in something else and say, I wonder about basket weaving. We don't actually do basket weaving, but you can find all kinds of different classes in there like that. With that one, you can always reach out for help and support to your local workforce engagement team that can help you navigate EDGE. If you have any tech issues with that, they're there to help.
And lastly, the exchange is that third part of volunteer connection. It is that Google of Red Cross that we talked about. Now, you might access this website through Volunteer Connection, and that is exactly how you want to make sure you get into it. But we recommend that you spend some time browsing the website, because there is so much information on our standards and procedures, on our policies. We've got toolkits in there, forums on anything and everything Red Cross. And of particular importance, you'll want to be looking at what we call the disaster responder training requirements. If you wonder if you're eligible to deploy or to work in a certain area, the disaster responder training requirements will outline in detail what it is that you need to be able to be equipped to do that job successfully. And this provides the most up-to-date training required for every gap offered by the Red Cross. So as we move to our next slide, let's talk about what are our next steps in getting started. Well, first, start your free disaster training. Again, there is no cost for this, and there is a myriad of leadership, disaster, preparedness, recovery training that you can go through, as well as other courses that you might not even think about taking, but it's on the exchange. And so you want to begin with the disaster cycle services courses that are listed in your welcome letter that you were sent in the email. Check the calendars in Edge for the class schedules and the course instructor and whether it is led virtually or in person. You want to be sure to attend any in-person or virtual meetings or activity offered within your volunteer activity. One, you get to know people who are like-minded. I know for myself, I tend to attend those with mental health, spiritual care, operational focus. I have many different areas that I deploy in, but I want to make sure I know who my local, regional, and divisional people are that I can ask questions to on the home front. The other thing that you want to make sure you introduce yourself to other Red Cross members. As you begin to get your own network of subject matter experts, as we call them, you're going to find them invaluable to you. If there are questions that you have, or you need to clarify what you might need for a certain role or requirement, or how you deploy, maybe you have questions about the procedure of how to handle some kind of instruction to a client, there will always be people who you can contact. One being your immediate supervisor. Your supervisor may be a volunteer manager or another member of the group, be a staff member or volunteer. And you'll receive an overview and description of different activities, time expectations that role would take, training requirements, and qualifications. All the things that you need to make sure you are successful in doing what it is that you feel called to do. So Ken, as we kind of wind down this presentation today, what else should they do?
I think it's incredibly important that volunteers stay in touch. We want that, and I hope that you want that. People volunteer not just to deliver a service. They volunteer to be connected with like-minded people that share their mission, share their values, and that they have fun being with. So here's some easy ways to keep connected. Know who your supervisor is. To detect a theme in that one, know who your supervisor is. And don't be shy if you have other questions or concerns. You can call a member of the Disaster Workforce Engagement Team, whose information should be listed on your welcoming. You always have help available to you at the Red Cross from many members of your team, Pat and me included. And you'll hear from us through emails, calls, for text messages, for various engagement opportunities and check-ins. Your participation is key for so many reasons. To really make the most of your Red Cross experience, you have to participate. You get out of it what you invest in it, just like anything else. Helping with tasks or attending events during a steady state time or non-response time is just as important as working at a disaster after an emergency has happened. Whether your desired experience is to teach kids about home fire safety with Pedro the Penguin, or to race off to someplace, get on the plane and go, everything you do is equally important in the region. Some opportunities you've got to connect with us specifically are quarterly all volunteer calls. Those are virtual chances to connect with Pat and me. Happens throughout our 5 chapters. Hear the latest and greatest information on our programs and events. And we do play Ask Me Anything. We take cards, we take letters. We have chapter volunteer meetings, and those are fun events where you get to meet our chapter leaders, receive interesting information, enjoy volunteer appreciation awards, and have more in-person fellowship if that's what you choose. There are so many ways to plug into the Red Cross and help. Something anybody can do is our spring Sound the Alarm home fire campaign. We've talked about offering the free smoke alarm installations to residents in their homes. The campaign aims to reduce death and injuries by home fires by 25%. Since the program began in Central Southern Ohio, we've saved more than 50 lives. 24 of those have been kids. And it's a chance for great fellowship. Not high tech, but it's incredibly important. You and a few friends, someone's got the ladder, someone's got the drill, someone's got the alarms. We're going to go out and make home safer. You have group events that your volunteer supervisors will host. It might be meetings or trainings or team building activities. And you'll have on-site training where you come to the office in your chapter or an office in your community. That might not be the chapter location, might be a public library, might be an emergency manager's office. And we have time for classroom instruction and in-person exchanges. We also do a lot of exercises. We need to practice what we learn. And so exercises are a chance for folks to come and be involved in different parts of the work so that when we do have to respond locally or respond away from home, we're on our game.
And we're always here to help, as Ken said. If you've got questions about how to get started or anything Red Cross, please know that you can reach out to your disaster program manager or disaster specialist. You can reach out to Ken or myself, and you can reach out to your volunteer supervisor, our regional training lead, or our regional disaster workforce manager. All of these individuals should be listed along with their contact information in your orientation packet. I know you may have other questions that come to your mind, but we are just thrilled that we've been able to give you a big piece of the information you need to know as you begin your volunteer journey. So we hope this presentation gave you a better picture of the organization and some guidance and next steps as to how a new Red Cross actually volunteers. And we hope your experience will be fulfilling, because you will be meeting some of the very best people in your entire career. And you're making a difference. You're making a difference for people having one of the worst day of their lives, and you're making a difference for that team member who has just helped so many of those people that might also need your shoulder just to cry on. I want to thank you. And Ken, I know you agree with this. Thank you for joining the Red Cross family in the Central and Southern Ohio region. We are so grateful for the time that you've been giving us. And together, we can make a difference.